Just to give you a bit of an insight, I look after the three elements of reward within FirstGroup. So I'm looking after exec comp, I'm looking after pensions, I'm looking after benefits. So usually those three give you a nice balance across a number of different time horizons. I think there's been some sort of confluence in the last few years and things are actually now pushing together. And I think there's a number of things coming around the corner that we'll talk about today that will give you some insight on that. For those of you who normally see me with a picture with my spectacles on, yep, I still do wear those. Unfortunately, I can't read my notes if I'm wearing them, so that's the line I'm taking there. It's also fantastic to be the first speaker today. I'm lucky because I've been able to look at the agenda and effectively steal everybody else's topics and summarise those into a nice, neat format for today. So what I'm going to be doing is just sharing my thoughts on where we've come from in 2015, what I think is the future of 2016. We'll reference some of the things in this booklet, the work that was done at the tail end of last year as well. You won't find any real notes on the screen there. It's all pictures. So if that helps you as an aid memoir, then fantastic. But let's look at what I think are the big issues there are in 2015. So this is the famous Lamborghini. This is freedom and choice. This is April 2015, and the ability to take your pension and do something new and exciting with it, buy the Lamborghini, turn it into something else, take it as cash. And personally, I think this was probably one of the dampest squibs in my organisation that we had. We didn't see many people doing it. It wasn't a particularly well enlightened discussion to start with. We did have a lot of initial interest, but the reality was people looked at it and said, I've got to pay how much tax if I take all my money out? Why would I want to do that? Actually, I want the security and the benefits. So particularly in FirstGroup, which is bus drivers and train drivers, averagely lower salaries, so very important concept. But obviously that is a very clear signal of what the governmental policy is looking like going forward. Rolling forward a couple of months, we got something unexpected, not the budget, but we got the re-election of the Conservative Party with a mandate to govern on their own for the first time. Now, I don't think anybody was expecting that because we were thinking about hung parliaments, we were thinking about elections 6 months down the line. And that has, I think that's created a number of challenges. We've seen people go in. Obviously, we can see Steve Webb up there. Now, Steve Webb was probably one of the most experienced and enlightened pensions ministers that we've had in the last 15 years, the only one that's lasted a whole government as well. I think Steve came up with some really good ideas and really sparked the debate. The problem was, well, first of all, he was 10 years too late. A lot of his ideas around defined ambition were really a sort of a stepping stone out of DB, and most of us have moved away from that. But also, some of the things he did, for me, were not so great. So, for instance, DC charge capping sounds very principled. Yes, let's not allow people to be ripped off because there's a 75 basis point charge cap on default funds. But actually, no concept of value there. Actually, what people live on is the net return they get after fees. So if the net return is low after fees, but it's a low fee, that's still not a great position for people. So I think there's a lot of work to be done there. But as part of the change that took place, Steve lost his seat, and we ended up with a new pensions minister, and obviously this is Roz Altman. Now, Roz is the consumer champion, but I'm going to ask the question whether she has any mandate in terms of pension decision-making going forward. And I think I'd probably say no. Where it's being led from is a very different place. It's being led by Treasury, and obviously it's HMRC. And this is all about taxation. And this is largely the theme of my discussion this morning, the fact that the way that we've delivered many benefits is through using salary sacrifice. It's through using a methodology that will allow us to recycle money within the business and access benefits and do that for the benefit of our colleagues or our associates, whatever term you use. But for a lot of us, what we're seeing is George Osborne, HMRC, really leading the way forward there. So what did we have? We had the changes to annual and lifetime allowances that are coming through this April. You could say, well, not that significant, only really affects a small amount of people. But personally, doing the exec reward stuff, it sucks up a lot of time for a very small number of people, when you'd argue that actually, surely they're big and butch enough to look after themselves. We've seen changes also to to dividend and personal savings. We've seen actually tax-free allowances put in for the first time, £1,000 for personal savings and £5,000 for dividends. The sting in the tail being that actually there's more punitive tax above that, particularly for dividends. So if you've got share incentive plans, there's another risk that comes around the corner there. We've seen apprenticeship levy being announced. Now, for a business like mine that has 35,000 employees in the UK, that's potentially a big number that comes through. So extra taxation, extra burden. And why is this? Well, it's all to do with the fact that 7 or 8 years, whoops, I should have left my glasses on. 7 or 8 years after the global financial crisis, we're in a position where we're still working our way out of it. We haven't got there yet. And while the UK is in a much better position than most of Europe, arguably, we've still got a lot of way to go. We're still running a significant balance sheet deficit, and we've got to work our way through that. So the context of 2015, as I saw it, was not that positive. And actually, for me as a reward manager, one of the big challenges was that I wasn't able to, if you like, determine my own destiny. I was responding to issues as opposed to being necessarily on the front foot. So obviously, Debbie's come out and said, we want to be positive, thinking about 2016, what might be on the agenda, what could be on the agenda. So what's to come? And the big ticket item for me is only 2 months away. It's what's going to happen on March the 16th when the budget comes. And there's a few themes in there. Obviously, we're going to see this picture reprised, and we're going to have a number of issues. Now, legislation seems to be an overwhelming burden that we're all facing. There's more and more of it. For those of us old enough to remember 2006 and A-Day and pensions, that was all about simplification. Nothing has become more simple than pensions over the intervening period. Yes, it is a golf tee. This is pension taxation changes. They're talking about the taxed exempt model. Now that would fundamentally turn everything upside down. That my whole year would be negotiating with unions, redesigning the pension plans to make these affordable, challenging the fact that we shouldn't just pay our colleagues more so they can still afford to put the same money into their pension plan. A very challenging issue. And what's it all about? Well, it's about accelerating the tax recovery, of course. And what we're effectively doing is we're turning pensions into ISAs and allowing the flexibility, very much like freedom and choice in the Lamborghini at the beginning, to allow people to take the pension when they want. Now, that sounds fantastic, doesn't it? But you look at places in the world where that happens, and I run a lot of pension plans in the US as well, all it really means is that people draw on it for hardship or when they need it, and when they come to retire, they've not got enough money. And so if pensions are going to be the thing that secures you after you're unable to work or you want to give up work, I'm not sure that's the best way. The biggest issue as well, and this is one that features very heavily in here, is salary sacrifice. We fund or deliver so many of our benefits now through the salary sacrifice model that if that is to be taken away, then that produces a massive, massive challenge on how we resource that. A number of you may be aware that only 2 weeks ago HMRC was consulting with a wide range of consultants and businesses about salary sacrifice. It's a great way to generate more tax. And if you do the numbers very quickly, you realise you save most of your salary sacrifice NI through your pension plans, but you use it for car schemes, which everybody says is going to be a bigger thing next year, using salary sacrifice, and so many other benefits. So if that goes, yes, that's going to be a major challenge. How are we going to be talking again with our unions, with our colleagues, our associates about what we can then afford to deliver? Because I don't see many businesses being able to sort of just create out of thin air a budget that allows us to do those things when there isn't the NI saving. Obviously, one of the other things that's coming along in April this year is the change to contracting out. So in other words, the end of the second state pension. Flat rate pensions, contracting out changes, so effectively we and our employees will be paying more national insurance from that point. Now that might mean overall we get a bigger pension pot, that could be fantastic, but alternatively it could just mean we're paying more money and there's less in the budget. I think affinity benefits is an interesting one. This is one of these where the report said 30% of you are going to be spending more on affinity benefits next year and 30% will be spending less. I'm in the latter camp. I mean, I think affinity benefits are now becoming so ubiquitous that it's really challenging to say, actually, there's access through other things you take. Why would you want to pay to put those in place? If it's a freebie, then okay, fine. But there could well be further developments there. The national living wage. Yes, that'll be an issue for many coming around the corner, and there's a session on that later. Gender pay reporting is another thing that comes with that, again, later sessions. Technology, I think, is one of the great enablers and things we've got to look forward to going forward. And I don't mean just providing our colleagues with access to laptops and computers and tablets and smartphones. What I'm really talking about is the fact that we should be embracing technology more to deliver much more effectively. We've done that for a while in FirstGroup. It allows segmentation, it allows personalization, it allows us to get better MI, and it actually allows us to sort of generate that knowledge and understanding of our colleagues in the same way that Tesco and Sainsbury's and Amazon and all those retailers that have Affinity cards and access, and you access through the web, they collect all that data, which allows them to target you appropriately. And I think that's something that increasingly we need to do better, is targeting appropriately. The concept of total reward, I think, is going to become a much bigger theme going forward. Technology is a huge enabler to that. 10 years ago when I was doing it in HBOS, that effectively meant I went to 38 providers and said, give me a data feed and I'll put it all in a big database and create something. These days, APIs and single sign-on and contract inquiry means you can just suck all that data directly into a portal and display a dashboard relatively easily. Now, this is all developments that many people don't have. I'm sitting there in a business that has 85–90% of its people on the road or engineering, don't have computers. I still have 80% take-up of all my benefits online as a consequence of making it the place that people want to go to see what they've got. Final thing is nudge. I'm a huge believer that siloed-based and time-based approach to giving out rewards and benefits is not the most effective way. Unfortunately, it's driven by legislation in some places. You have to do share launches within a certain time frame. You have to do other things. But you need to nudge people into making the right decisions for themselves using the behavioural economics and finance principles to say, when they're receptive, offer those benefits. That links directly with the technology side. You can't do it through a paper-based system. But once you've got those two aligned, you can have a really powerful, engaging way. People like you did this. It's that templating, it's that profiling that is incredibly effective. So, other things that we could talk about. Scottish income tax coming in this year. Yeah, great. The good news is it's still 10% on top of the base 10%, so it's 20 in all, so there's no extra cost, but it's something that has to be facilitated. Health and well-being, a big theme that we see. It's not really in my remit, so I can't really talk about that. But what I see is a world where effectively what we're living in is more uncertainty. My agenda for 2016 is not being written in advance. I'm literally waiting to 2016, the March 16 budget, and seeing what happens there. Okay, I've got a theme of things that I will be doing, but so much of my work could be driven by that, the consequences of taxation changes in pensions, salary sacrifice. I need to be flexible enough to be able to adapt to that position. Obviously, I don't think budgets are increasing in this area. We're all challenged to make the budgets go further. And if we do lose some of those savings, we'll have trouble. And if that is the case, what do we cut? How do we engage? How do we still sell the power and benefits that we are providing? And the final thing, back to that nudge and technology point, segmenting our workforce, treating people like individuals is absolutely fundamental going forward. If you do that, you get a much more powerful engagement position, and it should allow you to make yourself, I say there's 100 employers in the room, an employer of choice. That's what we're all after. Greater engagement, greater ability to say, yes, I want to go and work for that. It's a great place to work. Huge net promoter scores, as opposed to, yeah, it's a job. I get some benefits, but if I get a better benefit somewhere else, I'd do that. So that's my view on 2016. A lot of those themes are being covered in a lot more detail going forward. So I'm just going to encourage you all to stay for as long as you can today. Obviously, it is a little bit lecture-like, but that's deliberate. Disruptors, I see probably less within the industry, more external impacting us. So that leaves me just for the questions, if there are any.
Do we have any questions? And do we have the mics in the room? I'm just trying to see. Yes, we've got a mic. Has anybody got a question for John? He covered quite a lot quite quickly there, didn't he?
I always cover a lot quite quickly.
No, I think you've stunned them into silence.
Oh, there's one at the front there.
Brilliant. Duncan.
There's a lot written about alignment, and we read articles about aligning reward with strategy.
Yep.
Sorry, Duncan, can you grab that so that they can hear at the back?
We talk a lot about aligning reward with business strategy and what senior executives want, and you're essentially, I think, saying with the uncertainty and level of legislation at the moment, actually flexibility and adaptability is actually much more important. You've got to be able to, you haven't got your 3-year strategic plan. It's about wait for the budget and have a range of responses, I guess, that you then are able to implement.
I think it's right in certain places, Duncan. I mean, I've spent the last year spending 80% of my time looking at exec rewards and trying to redesign those to actually meet the needs of the business. I mean, businesses change. You go through growth phases, you go through consolidation, you go through acquisition, a number of things, and you need to find the right incentives to make people work. Now, make those things work and deliver it. So, yes, a lot of fundamental change, and they will be in place because we're in a transformational program. Once we get out of transformation, yes, there'll be something new. For me, it's about a case of, if I have the big thing is pension is usually your biggest cost by a long way. So pension, particularly if it's through salary sacrifice, all these things, the pension taxation change will be the tail that wags the dog, simply because of the quantum. And that's nothing we can do about it. So I think we've got to be flexible. We've got to understand, the value. And this is where MI comes in. What is the real value of each of the benefits? Sometimes we go and say, it'd be great to offer this. But when you look under the skin, you realise that actually it's not a greatly taken benefit, and it diverts you from things that might be more valuable overall in the strategy that you want to deliver.
Great. Do we have another question? Yes, right at the back we've got Matthew.
I should put my spectacles on so I can see the speaker.
It's Matthew Webb, Thomson Reuters.
Okay.
Hi. So if your best guess of the tax changes in March might be a fixed or flat rate to pension.
Yep.
Will that actually make any difference to your design?
Well, people think that fixed rate, a flat rate relief, whether it's 25 or 33%, is a very easy solution. And conceptually it is until you start really thinking about it. Because what does 25% flat rate tax relief mean? Does it mean that if you put in 4 as a basic rate taxpayer, you get 1 from the government, which is the design of auto-enrolment, effectively? Or does it mean if you put in 75, you get 25 from the government? So in other words, is the 25% of the total or of your contribution? So that's a big thing. So if it's 25% and it's on top of what you put in, effectively that's just 20% basic tax relief. So for those guys, there'll be no change. Has a massive impact going through the business, though. Because if you look at the effective tax relief that's required for a higher rate taxpayer on a flat rate basis, it needs to be 67%. Now, you may say, great, because if they sweep away annual allowances and lifetime allowances, all the work we've done in the last year of consulting with our senior executives is just swept away completely and life's easy. But you have to look at this carefully and say, what's the value of getting a minimal tax relief today and paying tax on your pension in the future? And so I think it's very complicated. I think for senior executives, you could well end up with the position that says, actually, while pension for many is seen as a very valuable part of the package, what is it now? Is it a cash supplement? Should we just be looking at wider wealth creation schemes? Is the world of the corporate ISA much more effective? I'm a big supporter of corporate ISAs, but they don't really work for senior executives because the amount you can put in isn't big enough. So I think there is likely to be a lot of change. I think it's unlikely, and I hope it's unlikely, to affect the vast majority of my workforce that are all basic rate taxpayers.
Thank you, John. I'm going to wind up there with a really interesting answer, and I think we'll be coming back to that later today. Let's give John a round of applause.
Thank you.